Wisconsin Eye is in Wisconsin Dells at the Democratic State Convention. We're talking to Assembly Democratic Leader Peter Barca. Mr. Barca, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Steve, great to be with you.
Well, did the Judge Crabb's ruling today, which you spoke about when you just spoke to the convention, did that give Democrats a major campaign issue this year, Peter?
Well, it's an issue. There's no question about it. I wouldn't. There are so many issues in this campaign because of the extreme agenda that the governor's put forward. But this certainly will be one of them. There's no question about it.
Well, when you meet with your Democratic candidates, which you alluded to, what do you tell them to really hammer as they talk to voters, Peter?
Well, we talk about the comparison between what the Democratic agenda would be versus the Republican agenda. Obviously, when it comes to things like jobs, the Republicans have failed abysmally. When you talk about tax policy, and you compare, where the average worker, people that make over $350,000 got 12 times the relief as your, average worker. That's not an agenda that will build the middle class. And as you go just across from issue to issue to issue, you can see that it's a very extreme agenda. It's one that really does not fit Wisconsin. I think that's why Mary Burke is tied with Scott Walker right now.
What about K-12 issues? What do you tell them? More money to schools, close down or narrow the voucher programs?
Well, we think that, first of all, there should be accountability for any public funds that are spent. Republicans have refused at every turn to have full accountability. Secondly, though, we think you should freeze a voucher program and not have a full statewide expansion until we can find out, first of all, if it even works. But third, we know that with the money they've taken out of public education, it's really taken a toll. And we support Superintendent Evers' agenda. He won by over 60% of the vote. And to be able to have a more balanced approach to funding education.
Would you take choice then just back to the two cities, Milwaukee and Racine?
Well, I would say this, that certainly if Mary Burke wins, if we were to take over one of the chambers, I think you would certainly see it frozen at where it's at and possibly go back to the two cities.
When I interviewed Chairman Tate yesterday to preview the convention, he said that you've got perhaps the toughest job. 60 to 39 and the lines that were drawn. He said maybe a more realistic goal is to gain a few seats and lay, in his terms, a path to the majority. How do you feel about that?
Well, look, they have a quarter of their caucus not running for election. So as a consequence, it opens up some real opportunities. You've got a couple seats that are Democratic-leaning seats in particular that we expect we've got a great shot at winning. There's a couple other open seats that we're going to have very fierce campaigns in. And then there's Republicans that represent Democratic districts that we potentially can win. So obviously we know it's a tough road to get all the way back to the majority. We hope to pick up a number of seats, and hopefully if Hillary's a candidate and it's a big year 2 years from now, then you never know how far you can go. Obviously that's when we got the majority last time, was when President Obama had his big year.
When I talked to Senator Larson, we did talk about some certain districts. Can we talk about a few
Sure.
with yours? I mean, you mentioned in your speech Tier 1 districts. How many do you have, and which regions are they?
Well, I mean, you start with, for Tier 1 districts, you start with open seats that lean Democratic. So the 51st and the 1st both fit that criteria. There's seats that are better than 50% Democratic, and we feel we've got great candidates there. So you start with those two. Then
why are they open?
There,
who left? Who retired?
Markline left in the 51st,
yes.
And Buys left in the 1st.
Yes. I hear that your numbers, the Democratic numbers in the Markline district, are about the best they could be, right?
Very strong.
Of all of them.
Very strong.
Okay.
I mean, obviously it was a Democratic seat. Still, Steve Hilgenberg represented the district until he retired.
Right.
And then the landslide of 2010, Markline was able to win that seat. The
Okay.
1st has become more Democratic. It's slightly better than 50-50 Democratic.
That's the Buys. Okay.
And we've come close the past couple cycles to beating an incumbent, Gary Buys, who was relatively popular in his district. Now that it's an open seat,
Okay.
A whole new story. Then you go from there. There's
Now you mentioned the 51st. That's Markline.
right.
Number 1 is Buys. Did you slip in there the 55th?
No. Then
Okay.
then from there you go to Green Bay area, the east side of Green Bay.
Chad Weininger?
No, it'd be the Clinky seat.
Clinky seat. Sorry.
That's nearly 50-50, not quite, But we have a great candidate there who's administrator at St. Norbert's College, been on the county board, served on the city council. We think he's going to have a real good shot at winning that open seat. Then you go from there to some of the challenge seats where we've got great candidates running. Then you get into sort of if you had a tier 1, tier 1A, so to speak, you go to challenge seats where it's always tougher to beat an incumbent. Right. But you've got seats like Lee Harrison holds that are 56%, I believe, Democratic, where we've got a great candidate running this time. We've had relatively weak candidates in the past. This time we have someone who is just a bona fide tier 1 candidate running. But similarly, against Bernier, we've got a person who comes from a strong agricultural background that'd be very strong. We have a couple other races. I don't know how much detail we want to go into, but there's a couple other seats like that fit that criteria.
What about the Mary Williams seat? Is that pretty strong R?
That leans a little more R. That might be just slightly below that level. Okay. But there's a couple others that we've got tier 1 people running at about I would say as many as 8, 9 different districts.
Okay.
But then you have to really analyze and ask me again next month, and I'll find out who's actually doing the work that it takes to remain in that tier 1 level. And then there's always some surprises. There's open seats like you say, Mary Williams, and a few others that sometimes you get some pleasant surprises where somebody really comes on strong. So.
It's not a presidential year, it's an off year, so the betting is that turnout's going to be lower. Do you think the national backdrop is going to hurt your odds of picking up a few seats?
Well, I'll tell you, the national backdrop seems to change every couple months, so hard to predict where we're going to be 5 months from now. But obviously we know it's a little tougher environment generally from when a president is running, but the fact that Mary Burke and Scott Walker are tied, I think speaks volumes about where the people of Wisconsin are at. I think they recognize how extreme the agenda has become. I think they recognize that the Tea Party has an iron-fisted grip over the caucus, the assembly in particular, and I think that that's going to produce some real opportunities and some wins for us.
How does the assembly run different if you're the speaker?
Well, it run entirely differently. First of all, from a process standpoint, we would give far more notice of meetings. You'd have far more public input that we'd be inviting. But then on the agenda, obviously, we believe in building the middle class, not dividing the middle class. So our goal would be to try to ensure that we're providing people with opportunities from the ground up to build the economy, and going back to having strong, educational programs that fit our traditions. I mean, the vocational colleges, we know you'll end the skills gap if you just have meaningful programs and have the resources in the technical colleges, just as one example. But, you'll see a strong focus on the middle class. You'd see, a much more open, clean, transparent government that is our heritage.
Would you rule out a tax increase if you were the speaker?
Well, I don't think that a tax increase would be necessary, frankly, because I think the economy is growing now, thanks to President Obama. Across the nation, most states have surpluses. So thankfully, I think that we'd be in a good position where you wouldn't have to resort to that.
When you say you talk to Democratic candidates, you said in your speech you asked them to, quote, put their life on hold. Why do you put it that way, Peter?
Well, what I said, I didn't say I asked them to put their life on hold. I said they were going to. They're stepping forward to put their life on hold.
Yes,
but
thank you for the correction.
But seriously speaking, I mean, it takes an enormous amount of energy to run for office. If you're going to be successful, you can still hold down a job, but you've got to be almost every waking moment beyond that, being out there campaigning and meeting people and raising the funds and meeting with your kitchen cabinet, and it's a huge sacrifice, and families in particular, it can be difficult on families at times, and fortunately the people we've recruited I think are have good strong community and family foundations, and that helps a lot too, but it does take an enormous amount of energy and time and commitment to run successfully for a legislative seat.
You're losing some of your veterans, Fred Clark, Sandy Pash. You going to be able to hold those seats?
In every seat that we have people leaving, they're all like, basically 55 plus seats, and most of them are 60 plus. So we're not, well, we'll watch it, obviously, because anytime you have an open seat, you have to be concerned. But it's not like the Republicans where they are losing people that are, that the other party actually has a majority in, or where President Obama won, for instance. We don't have any seats that fit that category.
Is Act 10 still an issue, Peter? The reason I ask is when I interviewed Senator Vinehout a couple of months ago, she said Act 10 is not an issue in western Wisconsin that is a winner for Democrats. Is Act 10 still a winner for some of your candidates?
Well, I think Act 10 motivates a certain population, of people, in that it energizes people because people feel like the fact that you can't even, negotiate for workplace safety or workplace conditions is an irritant for people. So, I think you add to that some of the other extreme elements of Act 10, the governor replacing 38 public servants with political cronies. I don't think that sells very well. So, there's elements of Act 10 that I think really are irritants that are factors amongst a certain base of the population. So, clearly in some areas it plays more heavily than others.
The rule in politics that someone is most likely to be knocked off if they're finishing their first term. The reason I ask that, is that no longer relative? Because you've chosen to not challenge in the Swearingen District, Weatherston, Tittle, Skowronski, Ringhand, Rodriguez.
Ringhand's ours.
I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm crossing that off right now.
Okay, good.
My error.
Yeah.
But in some of these districts, why do you not have candidates there? Just not winnable, or you want to conserve your resources?
Well, we want to be as focused as we possibly can be. We're focusing on the races that we think we've got a great shot at winning. Now, in some of these other races, it's, we certainly returned calls and reached out to the party members and had them try to recruit. But unlike 2 years ago where, we had a presidential election with a president that we felt would win. You didn't know if there'd be coattails, so we wanted to, just in case, make sure we had people in all of these districts. But some of the districts you mentioned, there's 60% districts. Let's not forget the Republicans drew these districts,
right,
to have less competitive elections. And this is a result. The Kenosha News read an editorial the other day that, myself, Todd Onstead, and Samantha Kirkman, the three people that represent the vast majority of Kenosha County, none of us are opposed. And their conclusion was that part of it is because of the partisan gerrymandering. And it's true. So, part of it is that people are generally less inclined to run in a district that's 60% plus for one party or the other, because they know to put forward all that effort and to have your chances be so minimal at winning discourages people. And that's why, we're for nonpartisan redistricting. And I personally, like Fred Kessler's idea of changing the Constitution, in addition to that, you can do both, they're not mutually exclusive, to have to ensure that you have a certain, number of competitive districts, because the direction we're going in, not just in Wisconsin, but across the country, but even worse in Wisconsin, I would argue, than most states, it's squashing democracy. You're discouraging people from even wanting to run, and that's not a good thing.
JHAC told me last week only 14 of the 99 assembly districts are competitive. Is it that low, Peter?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define competitive.
He's defined it as within 10 points, sir.
Oh, I think it's I believe he's in error on that.
Okay.
Within 10 points is barely competitive. Usually we look at more plus or minus 5, maybe up to 7. People have represented 60% districts of the other party, but it rarely happens. It usually takes somebody making a big mistake or having a superstar in one party and a very weak candidate in the district that's plus or minus 10. But no, I without looking at it, I'm happy to get back to you. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I would doubt that plus or minus 10 you're down to 14. But certainly Jay Heck is absolutely right that we have far fewer competitive elections now because of the way the maps are drawn, and that's his basic point, and I agree with him 110% on that point.
Is that a tough issue, the whole issue of reforming the reapportionment process and how to draw new lines, perhaps like Iowa?
Right.
Is that a winning issue or an eyes glaze over issue for the voters, Peter?
Well, I'll tell you, I think people are waking up to how important of an issue it really is when they see the results of having less candidates running in various districts across the state. But certainly when people wake up in the morning, when they're sitting around the kitchen table, that's not the first thing that comes to their mind. So it's an issue, but it's far from one of the top 3.
Okay. But the mood of 2014 is out there in this convention hall. You seem to indicate it's more energized, more engaged than 2 years ago, right? In
Well,
terms of state candidates?
I think that in the sense that I think people can see it building. I think they feel a real positive sense. I mean, you went from, knowing that Scott Walker would have a close election, but you went from Burke being 6 points down to some polls showing 3 or 2, and then just last week showing a dead heat. I mean, that's unbelievable. That is very energizing for Democrats because, at this early of a stage in the race, to have it tied is remarkable. And it tells us that people are recognizing this extremism and that they don't like that agenda. Wisconsinites, by our nature, are people that, roll up their sleeves, come together and solve problems. And when they saw that the governor's whole intent was to divide and conquer, and when they see by all the national accounts that he's the most polarizing governor in the country by many accounts, and certainly we're one of the most polarized states, if not the most polarized state right now, that's not Wisconsin. So I think it's not resonating well for Scott Walker, and I don't think it's going to resonate well for many Republican candidates.
Very good. Assembly Democratic Leader Peter Barca, thanks very much.
Great.
Please tell my friend Janice Ringhand that I know she's a Democrat. Thank you, Peter.
She'll appreciate it.